Our Christmas special Food Thinkers. It's fantastic to have you here, and thanks very much for coming on such a bleak day and a bleak evening, but to discuss something as cheery and wonderful to think about as cooking. And we thought this would be a great thing to discuss around the Christmas season. The symposium that we typically have at this time of year, the City Food Symposium, we couldn't hold it this year in December for reasons about timing and booking rooms and things. We'll be holding it in April, but we wanted to do something special in our regular Food Thinkers series, and we decided on cooking because of the Christmas season. We decided on cooking because Rosie Boycott's article in the Daily Mail, if you've read it, created a lot of discussion. And Rosie said to me that we really should have a discussion about cooking as a public policy issue. And so that was also a reason. Another reason is because the Food Research Collaboration of the Centre for Food Policy, our initiative which engages with NGOs and produces evidence that can be used by NGOs and governments and others to take public policy forward, is doing a piece of work on cooking which is being led by Marjon and Marjon Caraher and coordinated by Mary Atkinson there, which will be putting together some practical guidance of what local authorities can do to design and evaluate local community-based cooking initiatives. And we thought it would be a fun topic to debate. And the thing about cooking is that many of us in this room probably are quite passionate about cooking, because many people who are passionate about food, not everybody, but I won't ask you to say whether you are or not, but many of us are really into cooking. We kind of believe in it. You know, it's one of those things that you have a value around and you care about and you believe in, and that can often translate into thinking that means I think public policy should prioritise cooking. But actually, you know, what are the sticky debates around it as a public policy issue? What can public policy actually do around cooking? That's what we're here to debate tonight with our panel. And I'd like to start just by just raising some of the tensions that we might want to be thinking about as we're listening to the panelists. And as I mentioned, I think many of us will care about cooking, and that's why we're here. And cooking is indeed the thing that got me into food. And I've spoken about this quite openly before, but when my mother died when I was 18, cooking was the way that I kind of made me feel better. I ran into the kitchen, I escaped all the people that came into the house, and I was able to do something useful. And I was able to do something that was pleasurable in a tragic situation, and I was able to do something that was supportive of my family while not having to talk to lots of people I didn't want to talk to. So it's something that is very, very personal for me, and many people have that very personal relationship with cooking, and therefore we say, okay, it's going to solve all these problems, it's going to make us feel better, it's going to make broken families come together around the dinner table, it's going to make people eat healthier, it's going to solve all of these problems associated with food insecurity, because people will be able to have the skills to work themselves out of that in terms of being able to cook on few resources. It's going to mean that people are more aware where food comes from, so that's going to help sustainability. So it's going to solve all these multiple problems. At the same time, you have a situation where cooking is something for women to run away from. I don't know whether anyone has seen that fantastic Indian movie. I was on a flight the other night and I was watching it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's about a guy who encourages his daughters to be wrestlers. It's absolutely brilliant movie. I would recommend it. And it was big here in India, apparently. Anyway, the point about it is that they're in a traditional society in the north of India. And I won't go into the details of the story, but the father decides that he wants his two girls to become wrestlers. He didn't have a boy, and he wants them to become wrestlers. And they are like really not enjoying this, getting up at 5 in the morning, running, doing all this stuff to train to be wrestlers when they're girls, rather than doing other things. And they're like saying, I hate my father, he's the worst father in the world. And there's another girl in the room, and she looks at them and she said, what your father's doing is empowering you. What do I have to do? I will have to cook day in, day out, like a slave to my family. And that's all that's all I'll be able to do for the rest of my life. And it was it's set in a very traditional society, but it's a very powerful moment in the film when the other girls realise, actually, it may be difficult, but this is freedom. Freedom from the slavery of the stove. And that is still very much the case in many societies around the world, and indeed in our own societies as well, where women feel absolutely disempowered by having to be on the stove. It's not the freedom. It's not the bringing families together to them. It's a kind of a thing that they really don't want to be doing. And then on the other side, you've got people like Jamie Oliver, who is a completely transformative figure here and around the world. You know, again, talking about how one of the passion piece coming out, and he's not the only one. There's lots of other TV cooks out there and famous chefs out there who are really doing a lot of work for empowerment. And at the international level, you've got chefs talking about sustainability and reducing food waste, doing absolutely amazing things, and really inspiring people. And then you've got the fact that a lot of people watch this stuff on TV and buy the book and do absolutely nothing. And we have an enormous growth. We were talking about this, an expert at the fast food industry the other day, enormous growth of takeout deliveries. Like just, all these delivery kind of things where people are not cooking, they're eating cooked food, but they're ordering it in. More and more and more. This is where the industry's going. So you have all of these kind of tensions around cooking. And then into this, you have to say, okay, what do we do from a public policy perspective? And you can begin to see some of the conflict and contradictions and why public policymakers might have shied away from this issue. But at the Centre for Food Policy, we believe that is not an excuse. That there is enough in the cooking world to say we need to take this seriously as a public policy issue. It's just that we need to figure out exactly what public policy should do and how it can do it most effectively. And that is what our panelists are going to be talking about. Let me introduce them. They're going to be talking for 5 or so minutes. Martin's going to have some slides. And then we're going to move into a discussion, a question and answer, and let's, if you feel that you want to debate and you feel that you want to disagree with the panelist, this is about having a discussion. So by the end of it, we can actually think what are our public policy areas, how have we wrestled with some of these conflicts. Rosie Boycott is chair of the London Food Board and is very well known in her past as being a journalist. And I mentioned the Daily Mail article earlier, so welcome and thanks for encouraging us to have this discussion tonight, Rosie. Professor Marjon Caraher is a professor at the Centre for Food Policy and has been studying and exploring the issues of cooking for decades, and has done a lot of advisory work to local authorities around cooking, and he's also got strong interest at the moment in food banks. He's got a book coming out on that in the near future, and hospitality and a whole range of issues. Many of you will know Martin, so thank you, Martin. So I should say Rosie's going to be talking about some of the tensions I've been talking about and her kind of personal experience. Martin is going to be giving us some of the evidence around in this area coming from his work and others. And then I'm delighted to welcome Amanda McCloat. Amanda is at St Angela's College in Sligo in Ireland, where she's the head of Department of Home Economics. Ireland actually has quite a different system of home economics learning, which is really, really interesting. And she teaches home economics there. She's also a member invited by the Minister a few years ago to be part of Healthy Ireland, and is also doing a PhD with us at the Centre for Food Policy, and she has a master's with us already. Catherine Maxwell is the director of the Anybody Can Cook company, which operates in Somerset and Wiltshire. And it was founded around 9 years ago in response to local demand for people who wanted to cook, practical tips about how to cook healthily and on a budget. It's won awards. It's a really, really interesting programme. Welcome very much. And finally, last but not least, sorry, I'm missing out what you're going to talk about. Amanda is going to talk about the role of schools and higher education in cooking. Catherine is going to be talking about cooking initiatives and kind of private and community-based what cooking skills training can do to deliver. And Marjon Willers is from Islington Council. I'm going to have to read this out to make sure I've got the details right. Is a specialist dietitian for schools and early years in Islington Council, where she's been working since 2005, and she's also on the Islington Food Strategy Committee, co-director of the Health Education Trust, and a trustee of First Steps Nutrition Trust, and also has a master's from the Centre for Food Policy. And you are going to be giving the local authority perspective about what local authorities could do on cooking. So, with no further ado, I'll hand over to you, Rosie.
Thank you very much, Corinna. And it's really nice to be here. And I was especially happy because Corinna said that I can pose the problem and then the academics will come up with a solution, which strikes me as a terribly good idea, because I find it quite hard to see what solutions to this would be. But, I mean, my interest in it became the fact that everything around food is, let's cook again. And as Corinna says, cooking, the lack of cooking has this huge load of baggage now. Social ills, obesity, unhealthy diets, everything you can think of. And to me, the issue became, well, who's going to do the cooking? Because actually, if it ends up with being women that go back and do the cooking, then everything that I've tried to do in my life is upended. Because cooking was one of the main things that I was really pleased to think we didn't have to do anymore when we started to spare rib. And in fact, our one and only offer that we ever did at the magazine was a tea towel, which said, first you sink into his arms, then your arms end up in his sink. Not great, but it stays in the mind. And I certainly was incredibly influenced by my own mother, who didn't like cooking and who gave off radiated waves of this feeling of being trapped by the kitchen, trapped by drudgery. The food we ate was perfectly all right, but there was no magic about it. I mean, I love to cook now, and I think food is magical and cooking is magical, but you never got that vibe at home. And what we used to say, this is in 1972, was don't cook and don't type, and you'll get ahead. And over the years, and this whole thing, as Corinna mentioned, the article in the Daily Mail, at the Hay Festival this year, of which I'm a trustee, we did a series of reformations, and I did a reformation about food, and I mentioned this whole business of cooking, and someone from the audience, piped up and said, so you're blaming feminists for the obesity crisis? For which the answer is no, but obviously there's an argument here. I mean, these things happen together. And if you look back to the 1970s and then into the 1980s, that's where ready meals began. And in fact, at the point that you got, for anyone who might remember, Tim will remember, Shirley Conran saying in 1980, life is too short to stuff a mushroom. One of those ridiculous phrases that sticks in the mind. That was the moment that Marks and Spencer's arrived with meals you could buy that you could pretend were your own meals. And indeed, I did this often. You decant the stuff and shove it in a saucepan and dish it up. So there was a lot of, as women went more and more into the workplace, and as the whole balance of food, and you could see through the 1970s that the percentage of household income that got spent on food went way down, and that allowed that economic gap, which allowed the market for holidays and televisions and gadgets and more and more and more stuff. So you ended up with these two-income households, which were partly economic necessity, but also partly women's freedom and their right to do what they wanted. And the fast food industry could see a huge marketing opportunity. In fact, Corinna mentioned the new types of food. I mean, Just Eat went into the FTSE 100 about 10 days ago. So I see this as a real dilemma, because I do think, for all the reasons that we know, we have to cook again. We have to do it both for our emotional well-being, the health of our planet, and the health of our children, and the health of ourselves. But I'm damned if I'm going to see this happen at the expense of everything that women have fought for. And I think there was something very important that we got very wrong right back. I'm amazed to be able to say it 45 years ago. It's quite strange to feel you're in the middle of the 100 years, because it's 100 years next year. We looked at guys and we said, we want all the cool things you do. We want your jobs, cars, bank accounts, money, success, life outside the home. And in return, we want you to have the drudge stuff. We want you to take out the garbage, walk the dog, do the dishes, and into that pile went the cooking. And we so downgraded, I think, the things that women did. And that downgrade has never actually changed. And whatever anyone says, and I mean, I do think it is changing in a younger generation, but as a culture and as a society, we still respect money, ambition and achievement. And there is still a kind of glaze that comes into people's eyes when they see the man standing outside the school gate, as though in some way this is not a choice, this is because his wife's earning more or because he's lost his job. So we have to have a very big cultural rethink. So I'm incredibly interested as to how policy could help that cultural rethink, because without it, we have a lot of trouble ahead.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Very well said. Martin.
Okay, I'm going to use the slides. I'm going to make a mistake of letting me use slides. So that's a big mistake. I'm going to broadly cover what we know and don't know and summarise some of the research. But I want to just highlight something. A week ago, one of our PhD students, Andy Gatley, died, and he'd done his PhD on cooking. And it's just a sad time for us. Myself and Tim supervised him. We started work on cooking in the last century. Sue Light here was one of our first clients. We'd done work in Health Promotion Wales. So like Rosie, it's a bit strange. But we just want to recognise Andy and remember him. He died this day a week ago in hospice in Ealing. And he produced a number of very nice publications, one comparing cooking in France and cooking in the UK, and the significance of culinary cultures to diet. So just thank you, Andy, and goodbye. His funeral is next week. Okay. So we should enjoy cooking. This is my granddaughter. It's licking the last of the chocolate off her lips before she puts it into the oven. But I think we should remember cooking's about enjoyment as well. I think in terms of, Rosie said this, you know, we've got these calls, everybody should cook. And I think that's true. Everybody should cook. It's not just women who should cook. All the big data shows men are not cooking. Men cook for occasion. There's this tiny blip in the data about men cooking at home, but it's really so small you'd hardly notice it. Men say they do the shopping when they buy a pint of milk. They don't actually do the shopping. So household duties have not really shifted in the last 40 years when we look at it. So there is this huge debate in the arena, but then there's also this, as Rosie said, this notion cooking will solve everything, and Corinna said it. And this is, I'm sorry, Blur were not a band as far as I'm concerned, but Alec James is saying, you know, that the only form of luxury you ever get, the thing that stops people eating well, is lack of knowledge, not money. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to contradict that and show you some data at the end, that it is about money and family circumstances. We've now got data showing if you want to predict who people are cooking next week, you look at their employment contract and that they got money. And that's a better indicator than their skill level. So are they on a 0-hour contract? It means they're less likely to cook next week because they don't have money coming in. They don't know whether they're going to be called into work. So this is not new. This is Dana Atter's book, Wasting Girls' Time. Her argument was like Rosie, remove cooking from girls, make it available to everybody. And that's the problem we have. I think, unlike Rosie, I think we have to have a cultural shift before we have a policy shift. I think it almost needs to come the other way. We need to revalue cooking for everybody. And this was in 1971. But back in 1911, Charlotte Perkins Gilman was saying we need to do away with cooking in the home. We need to have commercial kitchens producing for the home. This is not a new argument. This has been going on for over a century. And Robin Morgan, who was a very famous American feminist, went in 1971, as a radical feminist, I'm here addressing the enemy, at the AGM of the American Health Economics Association. And it reflects what Rosie was saying, have we denigrated this to a huge extent? And I think we need to revalue the issue of skills and cooking. And this is some of the stuff. I'm going to skip that. So the tensions are that cooking is important, but cooking from basics is valued. The growth of ready-prepared foods. Cooking, is it taught or learned, is a key issue here. Because in the past it used to be that people learned it rather than were taught it from example. And now we're talking about teaching it. And I think there's a fundamental shift there. But that may be because there's a skills gap. Although if you go back to 19th century London, people didn't cook because people couldn't cook because they hadn't got cooking facilities in their homes. So there is this notion, we've revalued cooking maybe inappropriately. There is a place for fast food, there is a place for ready-prepared meals. Not every day necessarily, because you lose control. Is cooking in schools a solution? I'm going to leave that to other panelists to look at. Cooking is removed from the curriculum in a very formal sense. Many can't or don't cook. Many are willing to pass off prepared foods as their own, as Rosie said. You know, the manufacturers play on that. There are loads of examples. Growth of cookery programs and books, but who actually teaches it? That's the problem, and I'm going to leave that to the panel. Japan is a good example of where it works, I think. One of the few examples. And this is home economics in Japan. They've all the problems we have. They haven't got space in their schools. The schools are overcrowded, yet they manage to teach cooking, and they manage to feed kids in school every day. When you go there, kids eat in the classroom 3 days a week, and they eat in the formal dining room 2 days a week in the busy schools. Teachers here say that can't be done. The Japanese do it every day. And the kids serve one another. There's a whole social impact around this, not necessarily in the preparing of the food, but in serving it and the social impact. And that's what they do. Sudoku, it's about education and education of food. They really are into food education in a very amazing way. So what encourages cooking? Home life is what encourages cooking. If we make legislation that protects home life, that's probably a better process to encourage cooking. So 0-hour contracts should be banned like they do in New Zealand. In Germany, in Italy, and France, they protect home life in different ways. And that encourages cooking because people have time and space. And domestic structures such as eating places in new flats and houses. If you want people to eat together, you've got to build the infrastructure. I give evidence a couple of years ago to a conservative pre-election public health group, and they said, what would encourage people to eat together? I said, all new builds have an eating area in them. Many flats now don't have an eating area, so where do people eat together? They didn't take that piece of advice because that would have been a cost to developers. So that never got into the planning legislation. That's it. That's me.
Thanks very much, Martin. I'll hand over to you, Amanda.
Okay, good evening everybody, and I'm very honoured to be here, and thank you to the Centre for Food Policy for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a lively debate on what will get people cooking again, and for my part of this evening's proceedings, as a home economist, I am going to focus on schools and higher education. So we know that early intervention in young children is often regarded as more effective in facilitating improved lifelong health trajectories rather than corrective efforts in later life. So consequently, schools who have a captive audience are often seen as an ideal setting for various health promotion and to develop healthy food behaviours, food and cooking skills, and promote a positive attitude towards food. But for many countries, including Ireland, that particular role falls to home economics education. And for those of you who are not familiar with home economics as a curriculum area, it facilitates students to discover and further develop their own resources and capabilities to be used in the personal life. It aims to encourage students to have a positive relationship with food and to develop their knowledge, their attitudes, their relationship, their understanding, skills and values to achieve optimal, healthy and sustainable living. As mentioned, I am Head of Home Economics at St Angela's in Sligo, which is a college of the National University of Ireland, and we were founded in 1952. And we offer the only higher education programme in home economics, which is a 5-year Master's Initial Teacher Education degree, which means that students, when they enter us in first year, want to be a home economics teacher and feel very passionate about that. We currently have 360 students across the 4 years now, transitioning to a 5-year programme, and another 2 years or so we will have up in 535 students studying to be a home economics teacher. As part of this particular programme, food and cooking skills are a core component for the 5 years. And what we have found works well is the teaching of food and cooking skills in an experiential and developmental way over the years, whereby students develop a high level of practical food and cooking skills, along with the necessary knowledge, the attitudes, the understanding and the values. So as a practical example of that, in years 1, 2, 3 and 4, an average student student can have a 1-hour preparation followed by a 3-hour practical food class, where they cook in the main individually and make a variety of dishes, starting in first year from the basic and moving to advanced cookery technique. This is then accompanied by lectures and science laboratory sessions on nutrition, diet, health, sensory and nutritional sciences, food chemistry, physics, food microbiology, physiology, food processing and preservation, food policy, food sustainability, food quality, and most importantly, the pedagogical theory and practice, i.e. how to teach food and cooking skills in the classroom. And each year of that 5-year programme, our students go on school placement, which means they go out into the schools and they practice and are observed by subject experts. They are not chefs on graduating, but are home economists who are educated in a systematic way how to teach others food and cooking skills. And they have a very specific focus, not on industry, but on the individual and the family needs. They have developed transferable food, cooking skills and knowledge, and an ability to be adaptive in order to address everyday food and health issues. And these are skills that we hope they will then pass on to their students when they teach home economics. From our perspective, we do not teach a skill for the sake of that skill. We teach it for application, we teach it for informed decision making, and also in various scenarios, and we teach it evaluative and critical thinking skills. And this is a sound philosophical basis to the discipline. In secondary schools in Ireland, food and cooking skills are strongly embedded in a newly revised junior cycle home economics specification, which is still an optional subject and has just been launched. And one of the 3 core strands carrying the majority of learning outcomes and the majority of the assessment is food, health and culinary skills. And the idea behind this particular strand is to develop and nurture food and cooking skills in young people in the first 3 years of their secondary school education. This is all, this is all done through practical experiential learning. And why does it work well? Well, it works well because the students are engaged. So as they engage in the learning, because they have the opportunity to practically apply their understanding of nutrition principles in order to adopt a healthy, sustainable lifestyle and make informed decisions that will impact the health and well-being of themselves as an individual and also of their families. And just to give you some practical examples of that, includes topics such as menu planning, shopping, financial literacy, so budgeting, cooking, health and safety, food skills, portion control, reading food labels, dietary analysis, costing, sensory analysis and food waste. And these skills are nurtured not in piecemeal interventions, but as a developmental, integrative and systematic programme of study over a 3-year period in the first 3 years of secondary school. Investment has been made by our Department of Education and Skills, with the exception, unfortunately, of a small number of elite boys' schools who have fully equipped kitchens. So what works well in the teaching of food and cooking skills in home economics is underpinned by a sound pedagogical basis of a constructivist approach to teaching and learning. So picking up on what Marjon was saying, do we teach skills and do we learn them? So students are engaged in this experiential process, and the subject has pedagogical practices that transcend that transmissive dictatorial approach, but more of an experiential approach. In teaching food and cooking skills, we add an element often missing in other subjects, which is critical to nurturing these skills, and that is the active dimension of doing. This requires students to think critically and reflectively about the content and the process. And certainly another element in schools and higher education is the importance of having a strong workforce. From an Irish perspective, it is a high degree of professional capacity, training and subject expertise of the teachers. All home economists working in a secondary school system must have undertaken a comprehensive initial teacher education programme of 120 European credit transfers in home economics. And this ensures that the teaching of food and cooking skills is not only taught by subject experts who are experts in their field, but who are also experts in the pedagogical approaches required to teach food and cooking. So finally, what needs to change? From a schools and higher education perspective, and particularly from a schools perspective, maintaining food and cooking skills as an optional area on the curriculum needs to change. being able to cook for oneself is an essential life skills, and it can minimise a dependency culture. And some of you may be familiar of the US situation, where most notably calls from the Journal of American Medical Association have called for the reintroduction of compulsory home economics classes in the US. From my experience, I feel in order to effectively nurture cooking and food skills in either schools or in higher education, it is essential that developing practical food and culinary skills, the confidence, the knowledge, the attitudes and the values associated with this are all essential elements of any programme. And it is also important that these are taught in a developmental and systematic manner over a sustained period of time by subject experts who are not only experts and highly skilled in their own area, but who also have the pedagogical expertise to teach. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That was fascinating. Catherine, over to you.
Okay, so I thought... Can you hear me? I was going to share some of my experience of what we found works, and also what people have shared with us that they've got out from cooking programmes that we've delivered. So basically we've been operating for about 10 years now, and we've proved that if people come and prepare food themselves, so a very practical approach like Amanda was saying, they realise how quickly, easily and cheaply it can be that they can cook meals themselves, and for those around them as well. And they want to learn more skills and other recipes, and so it moves them on from that initial engagement onto other things. We really believe, since we started, that everybody, any age, any ability, can prepare simple, healthy food, okay, and develop a passion for cooking that maybe wasn't there. And it doesn't matter what sex, what age, what abilities you have, you can develop a passion for it that's positive and fun if you're in the right environment. So we design our sessions in partnership with the people that we work with and the communities that we work with, so that we include people. So we work with, for example, the RNIB, and we teach visually impaired and blind people how to cook, but we teach them how to cook in a way that is practical for them. So we're adapting some of the equipment that they might need, but we're not asking them to go and buy expensive equipment. We're showing them how they can adapt stuff that they've got in their homes. Okay, so it's actually accessible for people, so it doesn't add that extra cost in, because buying specialist scales that talk to you adds a massive cost in to your cooking. So we work with people from a few days old, as you say, if we can get them when they're tiny. Best starts, it's easier to start with good habits than to change them as you get older. And our oldest participant at the moment is 93. So, you know, you're never too old to learn either, so we go both ends of the spectrum. And we do work with groups and people on a needs basis, and most of the people we do work with are those that have got multiple issues and complex needs. But we never demonstrate and never stand in front of a class, like unfortunately probably you guys do. We facilitate, so it's all about that group of people knowing that when they leave that session, they made that thing themselves, so that when they get home, they can actually replicate that themselves. And they know it only took them 10 minutes in the session, because that's what I'm trying to get across, that it doesn't have to be, I'm chained to the kitchen. Okay, how can we come up with recipes that actually take 10 minutes and genuinely, not like Jamie Oliver, I'm afraid, take 10 minutes to actually cook? Because people don't want to be, we're really busy, we're a time-poor society, as you said. I think the 0 hours contracts and the fact that we don't have, you know, lots of people don't have the minimum working hours, it does make us time-poor. People don't want to be, they've got so many other things they can be doing. So what we're trying to do is make it a more social activity, bring the whole family together to cook, so it's not somebody's job, which makes gives it negative connotations straight away because it's a chore or a job. How can we involve everyone? How can the children get involved? You know, they can do stuff. I've got 18-month-olds that can chop mushrooms, that can tear up bits of pepper for you. You know, you can sit them in the high chair. They can be doing it from a tiny, really young age. So I think it's about showing people how to do that and how to make it easy, how to make it fun. And like Martin was saying, have those spaces in your houses to actually be able to do that. One of our questions on our impact form is, how often do you sit at a table and share a meal? And I was absolutely stunned when I first started, because I was getting forms back saying I don't have a table. And the number of forms I had returned that just literally said, we haven't got a table, so we don't sit together. And so the only time they were sitting and eating together was when they came to sessions, because part of all our cookery sessions is we cook together, we sit down and share whatever we've made together, and then they get some food to take home. And I think that's really important, and we've listened to what people wanted. So I thought I'd just share very quickly a few things about why people come to our sessions. It's around, a lot of them say it makes them happier, it makes them more confident. Social interaction is a massive thing. They get out the house once a week, maybe. We have one lady who comes every week religiously because she said, I don't go out the house apart from to come to cook with you guys. So it's about that, bringing people together. They get to meet their neighbours, they get to spend quality time with their families and things like that. Trying new things that you wouldn't try at home. If you've got no money, you don't want to go and buy a lime or a, you know, whatever it happens to be, because if you don't like it or your child doesn't like it, you've wasted that money. So by coming to the sessions, they can try things and have access to things that they wouldn't normally have. And it's also, they say, about sort of supporting their child's learning and learning themselves. You can develop your literacy, your numeracy skills in a very practical way. So a lot of people we work with have very minimal literacy, very minimal mathematical and numeracy skills, but they are actually learning how to do things, and then we can show them how that translates into actual those skills in real life. Financial capability, which is a massive one. If you've got no money, if you can't budget, but we can show you how to do that on a food scale. So we can show you, if you've got £10 to spend on your food, this is where you can save money, this is how you can shop. And then they can translate that into bigger things. Part of some of our courses are that they'll get a free slow cooker to take home. We show them how to save energy and time while they're actually cooking. So it's just about trying to get, while we've got them in the room, give them as much support as possible. Our partners work really closely with us, so if you come on a cookery course, you might also then get a free home safety check from the fire service, because they come in and do a bit about kitchen safety. So it's about, while you've got those people, how else can you help them? So by having those really strong partnerships that we've got, it helps them to develop their sort of wider life. So it's not just about cooking, it's what can cooking bring to your life kind of thing. And what we're trying to do is get people to go back to the idea that if you open the fridge, you've got a pepper, some eggs, what can you make with that? Not, I need to go and find my recipe book. Oh, I've got to go and make a shopping list now because I've got to go out and buy stuff. It's about, a lot of people actually have said that actually the programmes on telly and the cookery books put them off cooking because it's unrealistic. They see Jamie Oliver whizzing around, or whoever, whizzing around in the kitchen, and they don't feel they can replicate that, they don't feel they can achieve what he's made, or they'll go to his recipe book and they need 500 things that aren't in their cupboard. They want things that they can go to their cupboard and make. So it's just about showing, I think the most important thing around all food policy is to kind of show people how easy it is to do it, and that everybody can do it, and it's not exclusive to men, to women. We do actually have a lot of women, to contradict your evidence, that say they're there on the courses because their partner cooks at home. So we do have some people that say that. So yeah, I hope that's opened up a few
Thank you very
questions.
Thanks for sharing that experience, really, really interesting. And we'll end with you, Marjon, about the role of local authorities.
That sounds amazing, what you do. So my work in Islington, I'll give you an overview of the kind of work that I'm involved in. So I hope it doesn't sound too much like a sales pitch, but so I work closely with the Health Improvement Advisor for Cooking Skills and Nutrition, who has a background actually in home economics, so it comes from the cooking part rather than food technology. And really what we found was that without support, the cooking in schools is very limited. We found that often schools would use the same recipes across the year, so there wouldn't be any development. Or actually worse, the development of skills would reduce. So in reception, when they're 5, the teacher would let them use knives, and when they come to year 6, it's like, oh no, that's too dangerous, can't use knives. We started off with writing a recipe book for recipes, healthier recipes that could be used during lessons, so it fits within their time scale. And of course we tried and test it, so it's that kind of, which recipe do you use? You can't always rely on recipes books for success, but also it's a time scale. So, but then, especially now with the cooking being on the curriculum, of course many teachers come from a background who have not learned to cook, either from the parents or school or anywhere else. So we've got a generation who can't cook themselves, and therefore having to teach children to cook, they don't have the confidence to do that. So we have developed a cooking skills and nutrition curriculum toolkit, Cooking Matters, which sets out the skills that we expect children to learn across primary schools based on the core food competencies, and setting recipes against that. So each teacher kind of knows, I can change it, but know what type of skills we expect them to learn for the different ages and what recipes would be used for that. And that's set out across 3 cooking opportunities per year. Of course, schools can do more, but knowing the time restraint that most schools have, this was the kind of working with schools, the minimum we'd get away with to learn those skills. We've also got, with the PSHE coordinator, we worked on a program called Fun, Food and Fitness, which really looks at, for children, what influences their choice and their preference around diet and physical activity. Because again, we're being influenced by so many different things, but unless you become aware of that, you just think you're free choice. And of course, it's not quite like that. So it looks at that. And then we run a 6 weeks healthy lifestyle program, Family Kitchen, where parents and children learn to cook together. So that's from children aged 2 to 11, so early years and primary schools. And we either run a program in schools or children's centres, and that's delivered by trained staff from the setting, from the school or children's centre, or in community centre by nutritionists. And what we find is that the school programs are very well attended. There's no problem with getting families to attend, but actually in the children's or in the community settings, it's much more difficult. It's that kind of unknown territory for families to potentially go to, and people that I don't familiar with. So it's more difficult. The results from Family Kitchen, however, is very positive. Families report feeling more confident to cook and eat less ready-made meals or takeaways. They're more aware of healthy eating, the amount of sugar in foods that they might buy, and even things like, going out and buying a table, because again, yes, not having a table. And of course, one of the things that happens when you have a table as well, I think that just, again, linked very much to schools, is that sitting around a table, you talk. So verbal skills are improved when people have a table to sit around and eat. And children are more willing to try different foods, especially vegetables. So many children will come and start off saying, I don't eat any vegetables. You ask them what they like, and there's like no vegetables. And you think, how can you not like any vegetables? The range of taste. But it's that sitting around and that role modeling and those expectations of actually that's what you do here. They'll soon start to get the hang of it and become much more adventurous. The program's normally aimed at people who are not confident to cook, but we've also adapted for specific groups, most common in Islington, such as Somali, Turkish and Bengali families. In that case, yes, it is generally the women who do the cooking. And they're generally very competent cooks already, but it's still, they're very confident and just go get an oil bottle and the salt and just pour it in. So it's much more then about making sure that they're doing the healthy cooking, healthy cooking styles. And again, making sure that that gets then adapted at home as well. And that husbands, they often will come back and say, actually, my husband really liked that, which of course is totally important, because without that, it wouldn't go any further. And those programs are generally run by the staff from those cultures already. We train them, but so if you've got Somali Family Kitchen, it will be Somali school member of staff who will run that, so no problems with translations and that sort of things. So, but from my kind of experience, looking across local authorities broader than Islington, it seems that, Islington to some degree, but it's often programs commissioned and delivered by local authorities have got as limited remits, generally in relation specific to obesity or food poverty. And this seems kind of short-sighted. I think, it's interesting hearing some of those things that, yes, when people come into food poverty, is it something they lose their skills, or what happens to them, why do we need to specifically target to them? And I suppose if you think about some of the limitations for people living in food poverty, about the cost of ingredients and the lack of access to cooking equipment and the cost of fuel for cooking, might be more of a reason why they can't cook, and possibly time. And as long as, I suppose, a healthy calorie is more expensive than a calorie from food-laden, fat-laden, sugar-laden food, that's foods that they're going to choose over ones that might be healthier for them. But so I think cooking and eating together has many other benefits. Cooking programs, promote healthy eating in general. You can use it for, teaching all sorts of things, verbal skills, science, literacy, numeracy. You can do that all through cooking. And I think, but broad as well, voluntary organisations often find that working, for example, with immigrants or refugees, it really helps for social cohesion. It's the one thing, you don't need the language, just sit down together and eat. It goes across barriers, I think. So, and so it's got eating together is a very social activity. And then, of course, there's things like mental health, such as the Staines report on Together We Rise, showing how bread baking has a positive impact on mental health, including feeling happier, more relaxed, less anxious, and a sense of purpose and more creative. So what should public policy do? To me, it seems like public policy should aim to get cooking programs happening at places already frequented by the target groups, such as places of worship, schools, community centres, adventure playgrounds, children's centres, and be led by staff from those settings or community leaders who are already known and trusted by those who attend the programme. And include in this school staff, maybe health visitors as well. Currently, the professionals receive little or no cooking in their food education as part of their training, and yet they're in a key position to teach cooking skills. Therefore, an education and training programme should be developed to enable community leaders and key professionals to pass on cooking skills and consistent healthy eating message to their communities and the people they have contact with. And the benefits of cooking programmes really should be recognised much beyond obesity and food poverty. And therefore, the extra cost that maybe something like a cooking programme might have due to the requirements on a venue or the cost of ingredients, I think are easily offset by those broader benefits and the range of benefits within the programme. And I think, importantly, it shouldn't just be a time-limited project. So many things, it's like 3 years of this, 2 years of that, and we move on. We're never going to cook. We're never going to get a generation who can cook and possibly pass it on from family, to, from parents to child if we just do that. It needs to be a long-term project. Not a long-term project. It needs to be seen over a longer period. And as particularly, you know, it's a cross-life course, but of course we also have to think, again, if we think about generations, you know, those early years, like you said, it's so important. If we can get it right there, and often young families are much more receptive to make changes, so that's a really good time to start and do that. But I think one of the things as well that it makes it more difficult is that often people make decisions within public health teams might not have the nutrition dietetics background, so they don't necessarily realise the benefits of good health, good food, but also might not have the knowledge and skills to see what programs need to be in place. So to me it seems like that's something that public health teams should have always someone with a proper knowledge in nutrition to make those changes. Thank you.
So, Rosie, you said at the start about wondering about how public policy can help, and you also spoke a lot about gender. From the ideas that came up from the panel, do you see that, okay, so we had some people who were our last few panelists definitely saying, you know, cooking has got all these benefits and we can do it through various channels and various ways. But are those solutions that are being presented, that can be delivered through the support of public policy, are they going to address these gender issues that was so important to what you said?
Well, I think there are two, and that I sent into you, and that in a way have been touched on. I mean, one is that, I know Jamie Oliver did that study quite recently as how it was going in terms of the uptake of cooking in schools, even though it is now on the curriculum, and it was very poor. I can't actually remember the exact statistics, but it went down. It was very low, the uptake, and so therefore to actually make that robust and make that stick so that every person who leaves school can cook. I'm not sure whatever is exactly is on the school food plan, and that would dramatically help. That again, I mean, most schools these days are mixed, so that's boys and girls cooking together, which is also, I think, really important that they're doing it with each other. And I think the other thing that is really important, and I think it has changed things a lot in Scandinavia, is mandatory paternity leave. That fathers are absolutely obliged to spend time with their children rather than abandoning ship as such and saying, well, I'm earning more money. So this is something that's just a little bit. But I do think those are the only two policy things that I think could address both the need to get us cooking and the gender issue.
Thanks for that. And we have a slide next which actually lists the top policy asks of our panellists. So you can just, it's quite small, but just so you know what they are, and they mention the maternity leave, and Rosie's top asked about making sure...
Could I just ask, Marjon, I mean, in Islington, I mean, what do you do about a school that you can see is not teaching the cooking on the curriculum? Do you, get involved?
We do. We do. Healthy Schools helps with that, because they can't get the reward unless...
Without it.
Without it.
Yeah.
And because we've got staff going in, and then we've got the health improvement advisor who will then work with the school. We'll do staff training, whole staff training. We'll work with individual teachers who might not be confident enough to cook by themselves. And of course then we've got a toolkit. And then we also we expect to have the curriculum on their website as part of, the DFE expects the curriculum to be on the website, but it's not specific on the cooking part. We make them to say, you have to have that part on the website, because actually the curriculum...
So that is an Islington decision.
That's an Islington one, because we have adapted the Health Schools London criteria slightly.
Yeah, that's great.
We are there, so we know which schools do and don't. And then we can support them when they don't. But we have that's available.
And I think you also pointed out the fact that many boroughs don't have this resource, and public health resources are being massively cut at the moment. So I ring up people that I've worked with for 10 years and they're no longer there. So the problem is, this is an extra support, and lots of boroughs across the country just don't have this. Budgets are being cut. And
I think it's even having someone with a home economics background is unusual as well, because that's often done by nutritionists without that knowledge of the education part. So having actually the two of us as a dietitian and a home economics teacher works very well.
It's really good.
So we have, yes. So we're very lucky having that. But as you say, it's unusual. And then we've got Health Schools London, which supports that. And again, outside of London, it's very patchy.
Yep.
And the awards are very useful. Schools.
No, they're very good. They're very good. It's done a really good job there.
So you can see these top policy areas behind you. I'd just like to pick up on ask the panel to discuss one further point, which is the point was made by Amanda, by Catherine and by Marjon that, if you use the right techniques and you know your community and you have the right pedagogical skills, cooking skills can be taught and anyone can cook and we can spread this out, girls, boys. But then you had Martin saying it's all about protecting family life and not giving people rubbish jobs. That's the main barrier to cooking. So there seems to be a contradiction there. And I just wondered whether I had, whether that was a contradiction, or whether that is not a contradiction. Can you help us with that?
I think we're actually probably in agreement. I think people can have skills, whether they practice those skills and have the facilities, the money, the income. I mean, we'd once done a project in Scotland and we measured and people weren't cooking because they had a baby belling and one ring and the baby belling is broken. Well, and they had no pots and pans. They could cook. We've done a project in Liverpool where people could cook, but at the end of the cooking program, they still got the same income. So they're still managing on similar resources. I mean, what people choose to do with their cooking afterwards, I'm personally less concerned, but as long as they have that cooking skill. Because cooking skills gives you other things, like you can buy processed food if you know about cooking. It gives you those other skills and knowledge. But I don't think it's per se a contradiction. But I think, the time poor thing, the poor are doubly time poor. The poverty premium means that people on low incomes, we think they've got loads of time. Actually, they don't. They're scrambling around to survive every bloody day, and poverty is bloody demeaning. I'm sorry, I get quite angry about this.
Any other comments on that?
I would agree with Martin. I think it's about empowering people to be discerning. So, if you have the skills, that's what's the most important thing. How you choose to use those skills, is up to you. But as long as people have that choice and they are empowered with the skills and the knowledge and the attitude to be able to make a difference for their lives if they wish to do so, that's probably one of the most important things from my perspective as well.
Yeah, and they don't go away once you've got those skills. It's like riding a bike. You might not do it for a long time, but when you get back on, you can do it. So it's a skill that is so underrated, but is so essential in life. If you can't feed yourself, then you can't.
You're really vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can have the space, either in the house or time or both. But if you can't cook, you still can't cook. So it's you have to do the cooking first and then try and get over the barriers of space or time, whatever. But if you don't have the cooking skills, you're not going to do it anyway.
I had the privilege of going to one of Catherine's classes. And what she said, I think, was really important. She doesn't stand up and cook something and say, here's how you should produce it. The model was, everybody prepares dishes. So mine is lumpy and patchy. That's fine, because there isn't the perfect model that the food designer at the back has produced. And it's a wonderful experience to see everybody just producing an apple crumb, but what they can achieve. And it doesn't matter if mine's lumpy and, isn't as crumbly as somebody else's. And it's the pedagogical model of learning, teaching, or people learning to cook, not teaching. And I was hugely privileged to be at that session. I think it was in Wiltshire, wasn't it? I do exciting things like that.
I have to say, Martin cooked an amazing cake for our staff meeting today as well. So you obviously can cook. What do you think? Comments, please. Okay, I will start on this side and then go round, okay? Could you just say quickly what your name is and if you have an affiliation where you're from?
Hi, my name's Nick Wilkinson. I used to be a chef, so I'm one of those blokes that ends up doing all the cooking. I currently work at the Department for Education. And I'm also a trustee of Flavour School, which is a kind of fledgling charity that's trying to get sensory education into early years education. I wanted to underline enjoyment as something that doesn't get enough attention. There's nutrition and there's skills and there's learning and education. But to get people to do that, what you need is joy, engagement, hedonism. To look at a carrot and think, yes. Or a beautiful tomato or a crispy apple and think, oh, think about what it's going to be in your mouth. That's what will get people cooking. Is wanting to eat delicious things and wanting the people around them to eat delicious things. There's not many better ways to communicate. When I eat something, I used to cook a lot of sushi, and it's one of my favourites because you know what's in a mouthful. So as a chef, you can deliver an experience in a very complete way. So I know what's going to happen to you when you put that in your mouth, so I can design your sensory experience. And being able to share that is a very beautiful way to communicate with other people. Getting that, hooking the kids with enjoyment is so important to make them want to put the effort in, to learn, to care about the healthy side. And I just think it doesn't receive enough attention. It's all a bit too serious. So Flavour School's about that. We're trying to get kids into enjoyment through that route, but there's lots of other ones too, school gardens and farm visits and all these things. So I thought maybe the panel could comment on getting enjoyment into food policy.
Thanks for that. I'm going to collect a few questions and then come back to you, and I would encourage you to look into Flavour School. It's really interesting, really interesting. There was a comment at the back here.
We can share this.
Hello, I'm Andrea. I'm ex-chef, so to speak, as well. Work in hospitality still and very passionate about food and cooking. Also a registered nutritionist, so kind of made the full circle. One of the things which I feel carries through this and potentially in other areas of society as well is the fact that we seem to not value manual labor anymore, that everything seems to be focused around higher education, and the kind of manual side of things has been devalued. And through this, we almost have devalued that process of actually preparing food and the physical aspect to it, which ultimately is just as valuable as someone doing the research for it. And I think by re-evaluating what we pay for or what is worth it, we probably find a culture shift there as well.
Thank you. Any more over here? Yes.
I wanted just to make very quickly 3 comments. One is with regards to the gender. I think one of the interesting things that I feel we need to keep in mind with feminism, especially the dominant views of feminism, is that it's a very, what I would call, professionalized class view of what liberation is. And what we tend to see in that type of feminism, we talk always about women being managerial. And we don't, and I think that has now percolated into the way we understand certain activities. And I think we need to be able to challenge that. Second one is about time. I mean, one of the things that I have noticed with my children at home is that I don't have a TV. And by not having a TV, it has forced the relocation of the center of the house in the kitchen. And, I mean, it has also forced us, all of us, to spend a lot more time together interacting. So I think the role of TV in people losing that ability or time to cook is something that is often overlooked. And lastly, I want to make a comment around the skills. I think a lot of the times we need to question what do we mean by cooking. And a lot of the times we mean cooking as a skill rather than as an interaction. I mean, just to put a quick comparison, I'm a Latin American person. When I first came here, everybody thought, oh, you know, you must dance salsa and take it to a salsa club. I went to a salsa club the first time, and I was very impressed by seeing everyone dancing, how the level of dance in the salsa club. And as soon as I jumped into the salsa arena, I realized no one dancing. Everyone is performing. And there is a big difference between engaging in a cultural practice and performing a cultural practice. And I think when we're thinking about policies that enables that, we need to try to think about policies that allows culture to re-emerge as opposed to just focusing on a skill that is all about performance.
Thanks. Interesting set of questions there. Can I ask you to respond? Who would like to go first?
I might just take the excitement one. I think actually it's what you said is very important from an education perspective. If students are engaged and they want to be there and they actually enjoy cooking as a process, that's, you know, absolutely goes a long way to them, for them developing that skill. But also I think the fact that if you, as a teacher, you know, you're not standing up at the top of the room saying this is how it should be done. It's actually co-developing it. It's actually about learning from the mistakes, so that there is no perfect product at the very end of it, but it's actually learning about the process and being able to take that process away from it. Also, I think one thing that can be done, you know, I would have done it myself, is when I'm teaching very young children, to actually get them to come up with the ideas as to what they actually want to make and start to develop it from that perspective, because then that generates a certain enthusiasm. You know, even bringing in, when you're teaching about, for example, dairy products, or bringing in samples of different cheeses and getting students to actually taste them, those sort of activities go a long way to actually developing a taste. And also, I suppose, a very strong focus now from a home economics perspective is the whole sustainability side, and, you know, having a consideration as to what we're eating, what impact it has outside our local house or our own home. Actually, what is the impact of what we're consuming, and getting people to think about things from a broader perspective. Cross-curricular links as well is also a really good way of having developing that excitement and that engagement with students, linking up with geography or mathematics, and bringing it to life, bringing it real for students. Because often when they go home, they won't have the opportunity to do that.
I guess you're familiar with Washington School?
What? No, I'm not from the UK, so yeah.
Washington School, who have a whole school food education policy. They teach literacy, geography, history, maths, using food. They have the kids make a little stall to sell their cakes, and they learn about home economics, they learn about transaction, counting. So it's a wonderful medium for teaching all sorts of things. Yeah. Washington School, Jason O'Rourke is the head teacher there, and he's really led that movement. It's inspirational.
In Finland now, they are doing taste classes for kids from about the age of 4 or 5, and they bring in a different flavour every week, and they eat it and they talk about it, because they got so worried how narrow our diets were becoming, which I think is really interesting. And I mean, again, that's something that's happened from the state, from the government. It's become an active piece of policy.
I spoke to some people involved in that, and they said it's trailing off.
Is it?
Because of a lack of ownership there. There's a lot of sort of local stuff going on, but I think there was an initiative, and then it finished, and then they're having trouble
keeping it going.
Keeping it sustained, yeah.
I mean, I want to ask, is there such a thing as an ex-chef? It's a bit like an ex-Catholic. You take some of that with you. I don't think you ever think that. I think one of the problems in the scientific world we live in is it depends who funds these projects, and the KPIs are often dictated by the funder. So the health people will want fruit and veg initiatives. I think we need to re-envision cooking as a social skill and a valued skill, and actually stop this nonsense about it increases fruit and veg, or it will address obesity. I mean, they're not, for me, the key issues around cooking. I mean,
so how do you do that then?
Well, I did the whole social and cultural change. I think it's difficult. I mean, if I had the answer, I'd written the book and retired, and I don't have the answer, and I'm still struggling for that. And I think what you're describing here is what I call the disease called pilotitis. Let's have another pilot. What we need is a comprehensive approach to this, not one school doing this and all the others doing something else. You know, we've seen pilots and pilots and pilots, and pilots are an excuse for not doing anything, because you end the pilot and then you start another pilot.
and pilotitis is the big disease we have in the general health area at the moment, and education.
Any reaction to the comment about the manual aspect of cooking?
Yeah, I personally would really agree with that. That academic is ranked up here and manual is ranked down there. And my daughter's doing an apprenticeship. She's just started, but she was at a grammar school, and that was they were absolutely appalled that she was leaving school to do something practical, because she's at a grammar school. It's academic. Why aren't you doing your A-levels? It's absolutely shocking, whereas actually I was a chef as well, and I have seen the real value of apprenticeships. So, but they're definitely, academic is up here and manual is down there, and we do need to redress that balance really badly, because actually a lot of people who are very practical, and, as the world is changing and where we are currently, it's actually those practical people that might actually be able to get on better in the long run, if you look at it, than the people that are just purely academic, because they don't have the skills. When I'm recruiting for my business, I don't look at bits of paper. I look at how people are in a session. Can they talk to the people that we work with? Can they actually have fun? Because part of our thing is, if you read our website, it's all about fun. I got told off by a teacher for writing the word fun in a essay that I wrote, but no, it is about, if you're not having fun, what's the point? And we have fun as staff, and I want my staff to have fun, and then the people that are with you cooking will also have fun. So I think the fun it's really important. Everything's really, important.
Okay, more questions? Okay, I'll start again here.
Thank you. I'm Brenda. I would describe myself as a foodie, from Mother Earth to the plate and beyond. I have a couple of questions. This question could be to Amanda. And I wanted to ask, I might have missed it, so apologies if I did. Do you teach food culture, taboos, special needs? Because for those who do, be it home economics or food and nutrition or dietetics, and they're going to go out globally, it's imperative that they be sensitive to the needs of others, in particular food culture. I do have a background in food and nutrition, and I can remember many moons ago, we had a guest dietitian, and this is in relation to veganism and vegetarianism. Back then, it was seen as a special needs. So I just want to know if the curriculum has changed in relation to veganism and vegetarianism, if it's given greater respect. And what else? I was looking at that slide. I'm not quite clear in relation to food, home economics being taught in schools, if it's primary schools or if it's primary and secondary schools. I'm one of the last, I think I am anyway. I did home economics at school, and currently some schools it's food science. And I feel it's more for, in my opinion, workers for the food industry. It's not home economics or food and nutrition. From what I've seen, that's my personal opinion. And that could be part of the problem where there's a poor uptake as well. It's completely different. So for me, I feel I'm qualified to say that because I know quite a bit about food in terms of food science, nutrition, home economics. I can cook and I do cook and eat workshops, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Let's come to some questions down here. Okay, let's start here. And then go on here. Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm from the UCL Institute for Global Health, and I've been doing some work in Mexico, and I've been thinking about my work in terms of this conversation. In terms of policy, I think that it's really important, this idea of living wages and regulation of employment in Mexico. The average work week is 48 hours, which is distributed across 6 days. Most people want to work 5, and so they end up working very long days, and then you add into that the amount of time that they spend traveling to and from work. And you end up having people who are spending 10, 12 hours away from home, and there simply is no time for actual cooking. And there are massive problems with overweight and obesity, as well as kind of the built environment in Mexico. And so I think that in terms of policy, that one issue may be looking at the way that the work week is being distributed and the way that the work week is actually being formulated here in the UK. Kind of counterintuitively, even though we are at the Center for Food Policy, a lot of the discussion has been about the relationship between cooking and food, but I wonder what happens if we decouple that and we think about cooking as not being about food, but as being about other kinds of things. And so again, kind of coming out of that work in Mexico, that what I've seen when I kind of ask those questions is that cooking is about transformation, it's about experimentation, it's about identification. It's about perhaps managing budgets, that it's all of these other things, and I wonder if those kinds of markers then have significant policy opportunities built into them, where what we are encouraging people to do is to experiment. What we're encouraging people to do is to figure out how do you transform. You don't need to cook to eat. You can eat raw food. That kind of the idea is, well, how do I make it soft? How do I make it change color? That it's these kinds of things, I think, that also begin to articulate very much with what you were saying about fun. You start out with a yellow egg and you cook it really, really slow over 45 minutes and it turns orange. That's fun. How do you get that transformation in there?
Sorry, excuse me. I'm Caroline Seaman. I'm from Norfolk, where I founded, and it's still just clinging on by its nails in the great sort of behemoth that is Norfolk County Council, which is currently where public health has found itself. Where I noticed they have recently employed 3 senior public health specialists who appear to be doing not much apart from moving bits of paper around their desks, and they're earning an average of $78,000 a year. That is an ongoing issue that continues to be seen in the public sector, where we see high-level managers being paid and not necessarily impacting on any form of delivery, which is being cut. Community support and community development teams have disappeared, that useful conduit between the social care and healthcare and the community. I founded a project called The Joy of Food, and so it's, as I say, clinging on by its teeth. It was originally funded by the lottery after the Choosing Health money got taken away, and we were allowed to apply for lottery money. I did the many pilots. We had 5-a-day funding. That came to an end. Nothing was picked up by the NHS at that time. So I'm very familiar with what Marjon has said about this sort of pilotitis. Lots of health needs assessments, not much addressment. But I think that we miss a very big trick. One of the most efficient things that we found worked was where we were able to work with the soon-to-be parents. So and some of you, I'm sorry, have heard me talk about antenatal nutrition before, but it was where we saw real changes take place. And apologies to any midwives, but they are quite difficult, be it bunch, to work with. But if we saw more policy that geared that support, because what we're not addressing at any point really is weaning, because there's no point in teaching weaning skills to parents who are just dealing with a 4 to 6 month old baby, because that opportunity has been missed. Smoking cessation taught us that there is a window of opportunity because there's a willingness to consider behaviour change. And if, as part of our that bit after morning sickness, before a woman feels like an elephant, there is that small window of opportunity, that if we were a bit more bullish and determined, we would be able to supply the opportunities and the networks so that young parents, and that's both of them, can have a role in the feeding of baby after birth. The benefits of improved antenatal nutrition, so while baby is still conception, post-conception, pre-birth. But we also embed the kind of knowledge that we have lost through the generations. We know in deprived communities that frequently generation turnaround is a little bit more rapid. So we are losing skills from generation to generation faster. But it is a time for change. And I think the joy of food is that it does bring together families, and during that time it is an opportunity to change some of the familial norms that exist in the communities in which people are living. Now, I'm apparently a second generation, Rosie, feminist, so I applaud what you all did for me to be an 80s girl and get out there and thrive. Thank you very much indeed. I don't consider cooking to be a feminist issue, but I do think that if we had better food skills in our communities, we would see better food skills in all of our public sector catering environments, because the short hours, the low rates of pay that are given in those environments means that we are employing from local communities. Frequently we are employing people who don't know enough about food. And I've done all my fair share of cooking in a lot of those institutional environments, and cooking skills don't exist. Large companies have to organise their menus to meet the abilities of the lowest common denominator in their workforce. So the more we empower people to be more confident with food, the more we will see benefits across the board. And I'll shut up now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We'll just take one more comment from Gavin, and then go back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Gavin Wren from Centre for Food Policy, doing the Food Policy Masters course. My question is about the young generation, iGen, sort of 10-year-old children at the moment. You know, they're growing up quite socially avoidant. They're kind of, you know, they're interacting digitally, and they can learn literally anything they want to know about food off of YouTube. It's, you know, you can discover anything you want. And I guess pulling back from the sort of education, is this more of a symptom of a wider malaise of digital society, that you know, the answers are going to come from outside of, say, food supply or food education, and it's a broader cultural issue that we're looking at?
Thank you. Reactions to the comments that we've had from the panel, please.
I might just take the very first comment that there was, that lady. Just in relation to your query about vegetarianism, yes. Well, first of all, I suppose just to take it a step back, the junior cycle there is actually at secondary school level. So home economics, from an Irish perspective, is not food technology. It is a very distinct focus in Ireland on the individual and the family. So we do not look at anything to do with food technology from an industrial perspective at all. It's very, very focused on healthy family meals. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. But also in relation to the content that you asked about vegetarianism, and also in relation to the whole area of whether it's regarded as special. Vegetarian would be actually covered quite a lot, and students would learn how to prepare vegetarian dishes. It's also done in the context from a sustainability perspective, and how, you know, not necessarily everything should be meat-based all the time, but to look at alternative, and to look at, you know, different types of food that you can cook to sustain yourself. Another aspect that is taught quite throughout is the impact on food choices. So be it that religion, be it culture, be it you know, financial influences, what actually influences your choice of food is also covered. But I'll maybe I can talk about the food technology in the UK, but I think you want to come in on that.
So actually, since September 2015, cooking is mandatory as part of the curriculum. I know it's not necessarily delivered as it should be, but it's there, and it's no longer food technology, it's cooking and nutrition. And that covers, children have to learn where food comes from, they have to learn what is a healthy diet, and they have to learn foods, mainly savoury dishes, so that actually when they come out of school, when they come out of that mandatory part of the cooking nutrition, which is from 5 to 14 years old, they have to be able to cook savoury dishes for themselves or their family. So it's away from what used to be the food technology, which, yes, was about designing packages, like designing a pizza box, or working out how fast you need to have your setting for your sugar to fill up so many bags of sugar in an hour or whatever. It's away from that. We are back to learning about where food comes from, what's healthy eating, and how to cook healthy dishes. Is that GCSE? GCSE is different. That is 14 to 16, and that is, yes, that's still on catering. But from 5 to 14, it is about healthy eating, cooking, yes.
Although the delivery of that will vary. I mean, I think that's the problem. It's who delivers it. The GCSE is not compulsory. The GCSE is optional, so people choose that and sit the exam. But under the full school food plan, cooking and nutrition are. But who delivers it is the problem. I mean, that's the problem we have.
And also, it's actually not that much. If you look at legally how much has to be delivered over a school year, it's like
you
6
could do
hours.
it in a day. You could actually deliver it in a day. In the morning.
I mean,
that would be the problem.
And it doesn't set out, I suppose, how long it takes. And that's why it's like we work out, if you want to be able to do savoury dishes, if you want to, then that's when they saw this, like, actually, it's the core food competencies that they need to learn, and therefore, a minimum of 3 cooking opportunities. But that's still minimal.
Right.
But
it does vary across the
yes,
country.
and it varies. That's what we've said. It's not necessarily that other people interpret it like that.
I thought it was very interesting what you said about there is that moment when you're about 4 or 5 months pregnant that you have the chance to change, really seriously change habits, and that it would seem to me, I mean, we have the expert on all this sitting over there, Dr. Helen Crawley, but it would seem to me that could be integrated into health policy, that part of what you go through with your midwife and your doctor is about your diet. Okay, but I'm trying to think, if we're trying to think policy here, what's the delivery mechanism for the idea of change? And I think what you said is very interesting. There is a moment when you're absolutely open to thinking about a new way to eat or to be. And so who could deliver that if it's not the midwife? I understand, medical makes it sound like taking a pill. Helen, have you got a view? Here we go.
We now have 5 mandated health visitor appointments for every woman in the country, and one of those is antenatally, and part of that is to talk about food, and we have done training of health visitors around healthy weight and healthy nutrition, which is one of the 6 key areas for health visiting. So the most important thing is to try and hang on to our health visitors, and obviously with a lot of cuts we're finding that health visiting services are being cut, and the government has actually decided to mandate the visits but not the service, which means that over time we might find health visiting visits being done by independent people, not part of a service. So the most important people there are health visitors, not particularly midwives.
But there's the prioritisation on the ground. I mean, if the staff aren't there, we can't deliver. And what health visitors are doing is now prioritising. So those visitors will go to those most at risk, and that's usually around child protection. Yeah, but not everybody gets it because health visitors are now having to prioritise. There's only 3 health visitors in an area, and there's 300 to go to the most needy. Can I pick up the issue about culture? I mean, I think the thing we do have to recognise in the UK is we're about 5-6 generations removed from food. The French don't have the same conversations we have about food. I'm not saying they're not problems. I'm not saying cooking's not in decline in France, but they have different conversations. They laugh at us and say, "Why are you talking about teaching food and cooking in schools? This happens. This happens as part of culture. We have a disassociated culture with food." And there's a really nice piece of research. It's a commercial research showing we spend more time in our kitchens in the UK than the French do, but the French actually cook. We assemble. It's that the transformation in the kitchen here in the UK is more about assembly rather than cooking. The French will collect something on the way home, put it on the hot plate, cook it, have a salad with it, and that's a meal. We will open a packet, reassemble, combine. That's what we do. And that's a cultural issue. And some of that has to be welcomed. I'm not, I wouldn't run that down completely, but we have a slightly different culture here in the UK around urbanised life. Andy's work was about that, who I started with.
So we have some other questions that came up about technology and the point about cooking not being about food, but let's just have a few more questions before going back to the panel here.
I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. The first one, I'm Kay Johnson from Lancashire. I was also an ex-chef. The first one was about, we just mentioned there, Martin, about schools and who is teaching food. I was a few years ago in conversations with Edge Hill University, that's one of the biggest teaching universities, with the teacher training department, and they were seriously looking at incorporating food, cooking, nutrition into their teacher training, specifically for primary and going into secondary. I was talking with Food for Life about that, and it didn't happen, and I'd really like to resurrect that conversation and find a way of getting back there, because they were open to it. I just think that they couldn't find a way of doing it, so I'd quite like to see if we could collectively get involved with that conversation. The other point is the last bullet point there was about the creation of a training programme. For the last 15 years I've been delivering a Food Champions programme. First of all, I started it in Scotland, and now deliver it in Preston, mainly in Lancashire. And I've kind of feel like I've gone back in time. 25 years ago, I was very much involved with setting up food co-ops, which were a fantastic solution to lots of different projects, lots of different issues. And it was about trying to get communities together to get access to affordable food. And a lot of them ran cooking courses. It was great. So I kind of feel like I've kind of gone back to the very beginnings of my career to resurrect some of the great work that was going on there. And the reason that I saw that the food co-ops went into decline was because it was really because they were run by volunteers. So they fell by the wayside, and it's a real shame. And so I think that would be a great way to try and support that type of initiative.
Hi, I'm Fran. Just to jump on the bandwagon, I'm also an ex-chef.
Who's not an ex-chef?
I know. I wanted to pick up on your point, Martin, about the sort of British disassociation from food. And I wondered whether... I kind of see cooking as competing with ready meals and junk food, as we were talking about before, and I wondered whether there's a role for policy to play in clamping down on that sort of normalisation of ready meals and junk food, and maybe clamping down on advertising, especially to young people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Hi. This is quite an interesting talk, and the thing is, before I ask, sort of put forth my points, I come from a family, an Indian family, South Indian family, and we are a TV dinner family because our cats took over the dining table a long time ago, so we had no choice but to make space for them. But the thing is, that didn't exactly, get in the way, because coming from a family where I have a working mother who was initially, burdened by, the chore of, having to cook food as well as manage her two kids. And, in the end, yes, she changed, she just put her foot down, and, in the end, we all had to contribute. I grew up and I learned how to cook, and I loved cooking, and my father also sort of managed an expertise in certain foods that is unbeatable, even in restaurant quality food. He just churns out chapatis like a machine, and he's excellent at it, and we sort of accepted our chores, so I come from that kind of family where we have accepted the negative qualities of TV dinners, but we have sort of worked around it, sort of formed a dialogue over, the TV, over the current, over news and over films, and we sort of managed a sort of cultural, we formed a sort. So I don't, the thought that TV dinners as a negative impact on family over the, and as you're saying, the lack of a table is actually alarming, and yes, it is, but it's actually up to the families to work around it. So we sort of develop our own food cultures in our homes, and it's very intrusive to have, something else, sort of impose, an idea on that. And on the same note is just me traveling from South India to here, me being able to sort of, there's a peculiar quality about the food market where the processed foods are very expensive and the fresh foods are much cheaper. Now, I left that behind and I came here, and I love fresh everything. I love, we eat a lot of non-vegetarian meat, but we have fresh meat. We have access to free-range meat because factories, people, where I come from, there's not much space to have a slaughter factory. So coming here, I've had to deal with the consequences of cheap processed food, very expensive, hard to, access fresh food. And as a migrant, as an Indian, who is moving to a country, who is sort of looking at possibilities of employment outside my own country, I find that there is this reliance on food policy to sort of help things along. Sort of change the gender dynamics in your home. Just wait for wait for a policy that introduces paternity leave. And from the perspective of a migrant, of an Indian, and it's living in a country who is currently living in the UK. I don't think we can wait that long for policy because we are at different degrees of gender dynamics. Back home, it's still very prevalent. The duty of a woman is it is the kitchen along with work. She's allowed to have work. Of course you can. It's a modern society. She's educated. We paid a lot of money, parents pay a lot of money for education. So the girl can definitely work, but manage her womanly duties as well, and at the same time. Now, when these families move, just like me, when these families move from from these kind of cultural backgrounds to UK, how is the policy going to, cater to them? Is the policy going to affect them as a very niche, cultural background? Because we can't wait for that long for food policy to change, paternity leaves to sort of, make us accept the gender roles of, the entire family, like what my mom did. She demanded that of us. She demanded that of my father. She's like, either you go hungry or you help me in the kitchen. And we had to pick up our we had to do these things because we sort of, but then I feel that there's this dangerous, reliance on food policy to answer, all our problems. We wait for food policy to do this, to introduce, but from the perspective of these migrant workers who are living in the UK, who come from extremely we are a few years behind in terms of picking up on gender dynamics. We still need to get there. We have ideas, we have but then do we depend on food policy? And are there ways around food policy, around policy itself, to sort of introduce? Is there a way around paternity leave? Is there a way around regulation of employment? And as you said here, can we, instead of waiting for that to happen, is there something we can do in the meantime? From the perspective of migrant workers who are increasingly coming to developed nations and having to deal with this this gap in our lives. Yeah.
Thanks very much. We've only got time for another. We haven't got time for another round of questions, so I can see there is still some questions left. Could I ask the people who've got remaining questions just to say what you want to say in 2 sentences? Is that possible? Okay, 2 sentences each, please.
I'm not a chef, but in Cambridge we are preparing hustings for the next local election on food policy. So they're going to be live hustings, online hustings, so that whoever gets elected, we can go back to them and see what they said about food policy and hold them to account.
Good. Good.
Thank you.
The question is, what will get people cooking again? Could the panel consider, is this a ship that's sailed, and could we think about getting the benefits of cooking in another way?
Just wanted to ask the panel, how can policy address obesogenic food deserts?
Okay, and
PhD? You just sign up for a PhD.
Okay, just one last comment. 2 sentences only.
I think we're asking the wrong policy question, and policy should be asking how cooking and eating and food preparation can contribute to mitigating the environmental impacts of food systems in order to support sustainable diets.
Thank you. Okay, reactions from the panel, please.
Well, can I come
all
back
of
to that
those
one
things.
first? If you took that as logical, example, we should have community kitchens and mass kitchens because that's more efficient, and home cooking would go out the window. But we're actually agreed on the social consequences of home cooking. We should do that. That's the classic argument.
Yeah. Okay, so going on that point, there are quite a lot of people, especially in America, who think that the only successful way we're going to defeat the multinational food systems that have caused so much problem is to come at it from a climate point of view, because, as Chatham House said, if we do nothing by 2050, food will account for 75% of climate change. And the only place we've seen actual UN rules that countries have signed up to is on carbon reduction. So actually nobody can make their targets unless we tackle the food system. And there's certainly a food thinker like Michael Pollan, who is a wonderful man. He thinks that the whole of the food world should coalesce around the idea of fighting it through the climate change route. So there are many avenues in there. And on the person who asked about the food deserts, there's a huge amount of work going on around that. And with supermarkets, with DEFRA's procurement, but it's really difficult. It's really, really hard. It is, and there is wild price discrepancies between your corner store and going to a supermarket. Whatever we might think of them, you can shop healthily if you know your way around Aldi, whereas in your corner shop. So people are doing a lot. It's not a place that's being ignored, but I cannot say that it is making a great deal of progress. On that merry note, I'll hand over to someone a bit more optimistic.
Yeah, please, I'd like to hand over, but if someone could address the question, given that we're talking in a kind of white British context and Irish context, about we live in a very multicultural society. Are we considering the fact that people come from different cultures?
No, and I think that's a really good point, because if you read every single newspaper and they look at what their diets are, they all say eat tuna and lettuce, which is really useless to a lot of parts of our capital.
So, other reactions, please?
I mean, I have to say, I think it's regulation. I think if you go back to the health needs assessment or impact assessment, that should be driving our regulation, and we do need control over supermarkets, over obesogenic environments. What we've got at the moment is largely voluntary agreements.
They're all voluntary agreements,
Yeah,
actually.
well, the soda tax is maybe one example, but even the industry are now saying, the industry have been critical of the obesity plan, saying what we now need is regulation, because we need to distinguish ourselves, because we can't distinguish ourselves with this voluntary regulation. This is the first time I've heard industry arguing for regulation, and they're saying, create that and we'll work. They'll argue with us on it. I'm not saying they're going to accept everything we say, but they're now saying, work above that.
There was an interesting thing going on that came out last week, which was the Centre for Social Justice's obesity report, which turned out to be sponsored by Danone and Asda. And I and a few people, we all took our names off it and wrote about it. But one of the more interesting things was Asda, because one of the recommendations was a 9 o'clock watershed about advertising for junk food. And Asda said, we can't sign up to this as a single supermarket. It would have to be everybody. And sadly, the Centre for Social Justice went with Asda and removed the recommendation from the report in order to keep the money. Make of that what you will. But it was very interesting that they said, we won't stand out. And it was a real thing of being able to say to the government, you've got to get in here quick, guys.
I want to ask Catherine something, which is about, Catherine had an example in Wiltshire about Danone and cooking.
Oh, tell me.
Well, they tried to set up a cookery programme for early years, and people, yeah, where they cascade trained people to deliver a cookery project that they sponsored. Yeah, and I had quite a few issues, as Martin knows, with the whole process.
Did you win?
Yes.
The better project won at the end. But
yeah.
They have huge resources.
They
could go into schools.
I didn't, so yeah.
We need somebody needs to say no commercial sponsorship.
I mean, we've had people come to us and say, councils come, I'm not going to name who it was, and say, we have been offered 50k by Coca-Cola and they will refix our sports field. What can we do? And you say, have you got any money in the sports department? Nothing. Not like 5 grand or 500 quid, nothing. And it's really tricky.
Can I come back to the migrant? I mean, the issue about cheap food is, as Marjon said, cheap food is unhealthy food, and the whole food system is built around that. I mean, it's about the efficiency of. We need to reverse that. We need to. There's an opportunity. Whatever we all think about Brexit, there's an opportunity to revisit the system and say, let's put subsidies into healthy foods. I mean, the irony is 10 years, 15 years ago, I was working with local projects who were doing growing projects, and local food was for poor people. Now, local food is for rich people. Because it's a complete reversal if you think about it. We've got to reverse that and make it available for everybody. It's not just migrant workers. There's huge sections of our community who can't afford. And the poor are concerned about hunger, and energy-dense food fills the gap. If you've got a hungry kid, you give them a burger. I'm sorry, you don't give them an apple. It's an easy peasy situation. You can't afford to buy apples because the kids will eat them in 2 days, and you've got nothing for Friday. That's what happens. And we've got to reverse engineer that whole process around subsidies.
So we came here to talk about cooking, and we end up saying that we need to change the entire food system.
Yeah, well.
I'm sure you're right, Martin. I'm sure, absolutely. There's been a lot of issues. I'm not going to try and summarise them. We have some mulled wine and mince pies waiting for us downstairs. So let's go and get some mulled wine and mince pies. I'd like to say that we're going to write up these issues and we can circulate them to you, because I think there's a lot of really fascinating issues, some of which the panel didn't deal with, but which you raised in the audience, and thanks very much for doing that. Thank you very much for coming, and please share with me a big thanks to our panel this evening.
Yeah, that's Monique. Yeah. I didn't realise she was coming.